Good evening, everyone. Good evening and welcome to the Committee of 70's 119th anniversary event, Protecting Democracy, Charting a Course for the Future of Our Republic. My name is Eric Kreitler. I am a very recently retired partner of the law firm Morgan, Lewis & Bockius, currently serving as counsel to the firm, and I am privileged to serve as the chair of the board of the Committee of 70. I want to begin by thanking our featured speakers, Congressman Jamie Raskin and former RNC Chair Michael Steele, and our moderator, Lauren Mayk from NBC 10. More on Jamie and Michael in a minute, but I want to offer particular thanks to Lauren. Lauren Mayk was born in Philadelphia. She has distinguished herself as both a print and a broadcast journalist, and she has a passion for reporting politics. She is perfectly suited for our event tonight, and we're grateful to have her support. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you also to our many sponsors and supporters, including in particular our presenting sponsors, Brandywine Realty Trust and the Lau Longsworth Charitable Fund. We appreciate all of you being here, but I want to acknowledge in particular the numerous public and elected officials who are here with us tonight, including numerous state representatives from the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, members of our congressional delegation, including Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon, City Commissioners Sabir and Bluestein, and Secretary of State Al Schmidt. Thank you to these distinguished guests for being with us this evening. The Committee of 17 is 119 years old. We were established in 1904 with the goals of improving voting, getting more competent and more honest people involved in government, fighting corruption, and keeping people informed and involved in their government. Our core values have never changed: integrity, effective governance, free, fair, and secure elections. We believe 70 is effective for a number of reasons. First, we are scrupulously nonpartisan, or maybe more accurately, omnipartisan. Second, we're part of the fabric of Philadelphia. We've been a trusted source of information for over a century. Third, we have an extraordinary board, approximately 70 members strong, drawn from a cross-section of Philadelphia's business, professional, academic, nonprofit, and activist communities, all of whom generously devote their time, talent, and treasury to our mission. And finally, we have, and not least, we have an experienced and a highly skilled staff, dedicated to a person to 70's mission, led by Lauren Cristella, the first woman president and CEO in our long and storied history. I invite everyone to visit our website and to see the work of this incredible staff, our policy agenda, the range of legislative issues we are addressing, and the programming we're offering to the public. This evening's topic could not be more important, and we could not have two more appropriate presenters, Jamie Raskin and Michael Steele, one Democrat, one Republican, distantly separated in their policy views, at least based on the traditional political spectrum, but united as champions for free and fair elections, the rule of law, fact-based debate, and better democracy for future generations. Democracy is facing challenges in today's America, but the Committee of 70 thrives, and we are here tonight because we haven't lost hope. We are here because we believe that which unites us is more powerful than that which divides us. We're here because we can still imagine how we can protect our great democratic institutions and shape a thriving democratic future. And with that, I'd like to introduce George Hasenich, my fellow board member, the co-chair of C70's Policy Committee, and the Senior Vice President Investments of our presenting sponsor, Brandywine Realty Trust. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm George Hasenich, Senior Vice President, Brandywine Realty Trust. It's an honor to be here with you tonight to celebrate the 119th anniversary of the Committee of 70. Something that we hear constantly is our democracy is under unprecedented attack and in trouble. While there is an element of truth to that, it's also important to keep a historical perspective on how our democracy has evolved since its inception. Many of these hot-button issues like voter rights, gerrymandering, and executive power were just as present in the past for our country as they are today. Hence, a good group of business and civic leaders met at the Bourse, just steps from where we are tonight, 119 years ago, to found an organization that will combat these issues and others. This is why we need to think about democracy as a living and breathing organism that needs to be nurtured and strengthened with continued support of its core principles. As we have seen recently, democracies can become weakened and start to wither away. And this isn't only unique to the US. Back in the mid-1990s, democracy around the world was ascending in the light of the breakup of the former Soviet Union, as well as in autocratic strongholds throughout Asia and Latin America. According to data from VDEM, which is a Swedish institute which monitors democracy around the world, 72 countries were democratizing at that time, and only 3 were growing more authoritarian. Unfortunately, many of these advances in global democracy levels have since been eroded. The world now has more closed autocracies than liberal democracies for the first time in more than 2 decades. Autocracy is on the rise, especially in countries where democratically elected leaders have been able to leverage their position of power to capture more control of their government. All these examples show how tenuous democracy can be. Without advocates who are willing to defend democracy like the Committee of 70, we risk losing it. And history has shown that regaining democracy is much more difficult than keeping one. It takes courage and tenacity to take on the work that the Committee of 70 has done and continues to push forward with. At a time where there is so much at stake, this group has doubled down on its mission. This is why Brandywine is proud to be a long-standing supporter of the Committee of 70's work to advance representative, ethical, and effective government in our city of Philadelphia and throughout the state of Pennsylvania. As a company that seeks to create vibrant, inclusive environments where people and communities can thrive, we value the Committees of 70's advocacy for good government, transparent policy, voter reform, and more. These efforts continue to contribute to make our city and state an ideal place to live, work, and thrive. Thank you all for being here tonight to support the critical work of the Committee of 70, and have a great evening. Sorry. So we're gonna show you a video because we're real estate developers and we have to show you a video. So enjoy it.
We are fueled by a passion for quality, integrity, innovation, and community. A commitment to thinking big, diving deep, and delivering results. We are partners, neighbors, trailblazers. Owning, leasing, developing, and managing hundreds of properties and millions of square feet nationwide. We are always looking toward the future. We know the value in what we do lies in the difference we can make. We are Brandywine Realty Trust.
I'm used to being off on the sides, not so much at the podium, but I appreciate the opportunity for sure. My name is Lauren Cristella, and I'm the president and CEO of the Committee of 70. I am thrilled that you're here to join us in celebrating 119 years of protecting democracy as Pennsylvania's leading nonpartisan nonprofit with bipartisan support. Before we start, I want to offer thanks to all of our generous sponsors, including our presenting sponsors, Brandywine Realty Trust and the Lau Longsworth Charitable Fund. I'm very, very happy to share that we have officially smashed our previous record for fundraising at this event, raising over $588,000. And I promise you our team cannot wait to put those funds to excellent use in 2024. I also want to recognize our remarkable board of directors, led by our board chair, Eric Kreitler, who you heard from this evening, and of course, our small but mighty staff. Working with such talented, capable, and dedicated colleagues is an absolute honor. Thank you for everything you do to advance our mission, including supporting this event that will fuel our continued work. For 119 years, we have been privileged to promote, support, and facilitate election integrity. And we'll hear from our speakers that we're facing one of the most challenging moments in our history. A moment when democracy has faced some of its fiercest threats, when dissatisfaction with the two-party system is on the rise, and when renewal and reinvigoration of civic engagement is so crucial. It's an important moment, not just nationally, but locally as well. Philadelphia just elected Sherelle Parker as our 100th mayor and our first woman on the job. We elected our first openly LGBTQ and our first South Asian council members. And with this week's election barely in the rear view, the eyes of the nation will once again turn to Pennsylvania as one of the most important states in the next year's presidential election, one that is shaping up to be the most consequential of our lifetimes. At a time when it is under threat, we must remember that democracy works better when we earn and hold trust. Trust in local election officials, in the integrity of our systems, and in each other. There are hundreds of ways that each of us can do just that. And for 119 years, the Committee of 70 has been proud to be the on-ramp for Pennsylvanians looking to get engaged. You want to be more informed when you vote? 70 has an interactive voter guide so you can vote with confidence. You want to become a poll worker to help make our elections happen? 70 will help you successfully serve. You want to encourage your employees to vote? 70's We Vote program has toolkits that make it easy and fun for your staff to cast their ballots. You want to better understand how government works right here in Philly? 70 has just published guides that cover every level of government, of our city government, and we have them in 3 different languages so that communities all across our city can better understand how Philly works and how to work Philly for their communities. You want to make sure your kids are prepared for active citizenship? We have civic education resources and programs for every student in Pennsylvania, from kindergarten to college. We are proud to help everyone take the next step in becoming more active citizens, wherever you are on the ladder of engagement or the political spectrum. Because the Committee of 70 believes that finding common ground and taking action is the only path towards a vibrant and open democracy. Thank you so much for being here and for supporting the Committee of 70. We are prepared to meet this historic moment, and we hope you will join us in this vital work. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers. who will give us their perspective on the state of our politics and what we can do to protect democracy as we head into 2024. We're thrilled to welcome Congressman Jamie Raskin, who represents Maryland's 8th District in the House of Representatives and is now serving his 4th term. Representative Raskin was the lead impeachment manager in the second impeachment trial of the former president and served on the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack. Prior to serving in Congress, Representative Raskin was a 3-term state senator and a constitutional law professor at American University. Representative Raskin is also a New York Times bestselling author of many acclaimed books. Joining him is his fellow Marylander, the former chair of the Republican National Committee, Michael Steele. A self-described Lincoln Republican, Chairman Steele used a commitment to grassroots party building and at the state and local levels to break fundraising records and guide the GOP to massive electoral gains in 2010. Prior to his tenure at the RNC, he made history as the first African-American elected to statewide office in Maryland when he was elected lieutenant governor in 2003. His ability as a communicator led him to his current role as a political commentator for MSNBC. He has authored multiple books, and his writings have been featured in numerous national publications, and he's also the host of the Michael Steele podcast. We thank you both for crossing the Mason-Dixon line to join us for this event. Their discussion will be moderated by NBC 10 reporter Lauren Mayk, whose masterful reporting on a variety of topics, but most especially politics at every level, has informed and engaged Philadelphians for years. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
I think I'm here, and pick a chair.
Pick a chair. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. I take it you can hear me okay? All right, as we get ourselves settled here, we're going to try to make this a conversation. I may direct some questions to one of you. Feel free to jump in. And I know that some of you have had a long week if you were involved in the election on either side of the aisle.
A little bit.
So we're going to try to keep this engaging, and I will keep an eye on my time as well. So let's get started. For those of you who have seen President Biden give a speech, just about any speech, he ends it in the same way, by saying that he is more optimistic today about this country than he ever has been. If he ever removes that line, that certainly would be notable, and we'll keep an eye out for that. But as we start this conversation, I wanted to start by asking both of you how you are feeling in this moment, how optimistic or how concerned you are about this country. Congressman, we'll start with you.
Well, in this moment, I'm feeling extremely optimistic to be in the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. And I suppose the only other place I'd rather be is the Four Seasons and landscaping business right outside of Philly, but maybe somebody will take me there to check it out. But, you know, we had a fantastic election on Tuesday, which, despite all of the anxiety and, you know, bedwetting in Washington, D.C., demonstrates that the party of democracy and freedom, which is my party, is alive and kicking in the grassroots and understands the nature of the threat. But I got to tell you, I'm very charged up to be in Philadelphia, in Ben Franklin City, and with all these great Philadelphians. I mean, this Committee of 70 thing you have, that's extraordinary. I don't know of anything like that in the country that exists in another place. Maybe it does. Maybe you've found your counterparts, but I think it's amazing because you know, it's that kind of civic activism and investment in democracy that's going to keep us going. So I was thinking when I was sitting there about, I lived in France for a year when I was on sabbatical once, and I got to do a tour of Paris through the eyes of Thomas Jefferson. There was a Jefferson scholar. And she told us that when Jefferson would get up, he would toast the people of France, and he'd say that everybody on earth who loves freedom has two countries, his or her own, in France. And I was thinking, watching you guys up there, that everybody in America who loves democracy has two cities, his or her own, in Philadelphia. So thank you for what you're doing.
And that's why he's the congressman. I'm just the lieutenant governor. It is great to be back here at this beautiful center. I was here about a year ago for an event, and we had a convention of like-minded, democracy-loving men and women who gathered at that time to have an assessment, to take an assessment of where we were. And the spirit of this city is so overwhelming and so powerful, and it's such a great joy for me to be back. I actually lived a little bit on the main line back in the day when I was an Augustinian seminarian. So I'm very familiar. My wife went to Wharton, so Pennsylvania and Philly in particular have always been someplace special for me. And I love that commercial. So, dude, I got some political ads we need to put together. Get me in touch, right? Smooth, I love the scenery. It's just great to be here and to be with you, and I'm so happy you're all here tonight because I can see the concern on your faces. I can also see the hope. I am, however, trepidatious about where we are. I'm concerned about where we are. I am fearful that while we in this room may understand the moment, a lot of folks may not. And there was a lot of hair on fire with the New York Times poll earlier this week showing Joe Biden behind by significant numbers in 5 out of the 6 battleground states that will be the difference makers in the 2024 election. Keep in mind, Joe Biden is president because he won by 78,000 votes, not 8 million. And we fundamentally need to appreciate and understand, particularly in this space, how we elect a president. Michigan, Wisconsin, and this great state are the differentiators in the 2020 election, 78,000 votes. If that had shifted by a mere 15 to 20,000 in any one of those states, he would have lost. So this, for me, is a sobering moment. And I have been for a long time very clear in my view of this moment, that we are one here because this is where we choose to be. We've allowed these forces to rise up without opposition. Yes, the Democrats have won some very important battles in 2018 and 2022 and just yesterday. But I don't think those battles have really gotten to the real core root of what's rotting beneath us. And how we, and I'm hoping in this discussion we can talk about how we as citizens, we the people, the most important words of our founding, we were empowered to be in charge of this. And we were empowered to be concerned about how it plays out. So that's how I am in this moment. I am hopeful, but I'm concerned, so.
We've already referenced the election this week. I know you're happy with some of the outcomes, but I want to dig a little bit more into sort of what it tells us, what the results tell us, what the turnout tells us, what other things tell us. What did you see on Tuesday that tells you anything?
So Tuesday was about a lot of things that sort of come together as they normally do in an election. And sort of one of the big drivers, of course, was abortion, was the abortion issue. We saw that play out in Ohio. We saw it play out in the gubernatorial election. As part of, there were other aspects of that race for governor in Kentucky. But that issue was a thread, and it speaks to the fact that fundamentally there are citizens out there who are concerned about having their rights stripped away. And I think that's important, that's extremely important. And if that's the thing that gets us over the finish line in 24, if that's the thing that gets people up and out of their homes, if that's the thing that makes them look past the fact that Joe Biden is 80 years old and oh my God, is that the thing that makes people understand why we're doing what we're doing? Okay, I'm there, let's do that thing. Let's make it work. Let's make it the thing. But my concern is that there are other aspects of this election that also may have been missed, that in some down ballot races, Republicans did okay. They did pretty well. And Kentucky is a good example. The only race that Republicans lost was the statewide race for governor. Secretary of State, Attorney General, and a lot of down ballot races, Republicans did very well. So I think we need to fully understand, and that's part of what I'm doing now, is trying to digest what happened and kind of put it in some perspective. So I have a better understanding of how that will inform congressional races next year. I think the Democrats have a very good advantage, a strong advantage, congressional races. Today, their Senate opportunities became a little bit more difficult with Joe Manchin announcing he was not going to run. Now, of course, I knew he wasn't going to do that, and probably most of you did too. But how does that change the political calculation for the balance of power in the Senate? Because now it's real. And when things become real in politics, people react and respond differently to them. And that's where elections become very important, which is why the Dobbs decision played sort of an outsized role, if you will, in voter behavior, given everything else, the economy especially, which was a big driver for voters, and so forth. So we're still digesting a little bit of this, but I think we need to be smart about how we set up the storylines for 2024 so that we don't misread them like we did in 2016.
There was something that happened here in Philadelphia on Tuesday, and I won't get too deep into the weeds of the Philadelphia Charter, but there were two third-party candidates who won seats on Philadelphia City Council. There are two at-large council seats that are reserved for the non-majority party, which in Philadelphia means not a Democrat. Mm-hmm. The Working Families Party won those seats. They had traditionally been held by Republicans. A Working Families Party candidate actually won 4 years ago and then got reelected, and another one got elected. So, point being, this sort of tees up a conversation about where we are in terms of the two-party system. Mm-hmm. And here we had voters in Philadelphia saying, hey, we're going to go with them. Where are we?
So first, if you don't mind, I do want to say something about what Michael said about abortion.
Absolutely.
Because, I mean, I take it we're going to be agreeing on a lot of stuff tonight, like the fundamentals of defending constitutional democracy and freedom, but we might be in a different place on abortion. I don't grudgingly say, well, that might be the issue that saves us. I say we should celebrate the fact that the women of America have stood up and asserted their right to make their own decisions and their freedom being central. So, you know, and I think that America's people are connecting the assault on women's freedom. And right now, in more than a third of the country, you can't get an abortion. It is, you know, it is a complete shutdown. And they're trying to ban crossing state lines for the purposes of getting health care, which takes us back to debates that were taking place in the 19th century about fugitive slave laws and whether people could cross state lines in order to exercise freedom. And, you know, my beloved colleagues across the aisle just elected a theocrat as the Speaker of the House of Representatives, whose position is a total nationwide ban on abortion with no exceptions for rape or incest. And so this is a freedom-loving country. People are not going to put up with that. And I think that people understand the connection between freedom and democracy. Abraham Lincoln put it really well. Somebody said to him, well, what's the difference between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution? He said, well, the Constitution is like the silver platter with all of the rules and the structures and the processes. But upon the silver platter sits the golden apple of liberty. In other words, it's democracy that protects our freedom. And that's why democracy is important. We're not going to be able to trust any of the autocrats from Moscow to Mar-a-Lago, or the theocrats or the kleptocrats or the plutocrats to defend democracy. It's only the people organized who will do that. Now let me say something about the party system. There, of course, is no two-party system in a constitutional sense. The Constitution doesn't mention political parties, much less a two-party system. And we've had lots of parties that have risen and fallen. And the Republican Party, of course, replaced the Whigs. That was a third party, the Republican Party. And if the Republican Party has to be replaced and substituted for because of its assault on constitutional values, then so be it. The parties don't matter. It's the people's freedom and democracy that matters.
What does, though, the willingness to go with a third party mean for Democrats as well?
Well, it means Democrats better wake up. Republicans better wake up. Sometimes, people attack partisanship or hyper-partisanship or whatever, and I don't fall for any of that stuff. I mean, when I hear partisanship and partisans out arguing and organizing, I celebrate that. That's an expression of democratic life. Parties are the oxygen of democracy. You want to get rid of partisanship? You just get rid of parties except for one. That's what Vladimir Putin wants to do. There's no partisanship in Russia, because if you're a partisan and you're not in Putin's team, you're going to jail. Just like illiberal democracy in Hungary and all of the authoritarian countries on earth. So I'm for more competition among the parties. I think the Democrats need competition. The Republicans certainly need competition, and that's the problem with the gerrymandering of our state and federal legislative districts. People get real comfortable because they're drawn into a place where there's no competition, and competition's good in business, it's good in sports, and it's good in politics too. And so I'm for people being partisan. The problem, of course, is once we get elected, people have got to remember what the word party means, right? It comes from the French word parti, a part. Our party is just part of the whole. And once we get elected, we have to do whatever we can to try to think about the whole. And that starts with the Constitution. And so that's why I was so disappointed when we went over to the Senate in the impeachment trial, and there were senators there who had sworn first an oath to support and uphold and defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. Then they swore another oath as jurors to render impartial justice, which means nonpartisan justice. And they broke both of those oaths because before the trial even started, they said, we're going to vote to acquit Donald Trump because, he's popular in our party. I'm sorry for mentioning his name. I noticed that you kind of delicately danced around.
Oh, no, not me.
So, yeah. But no,
I cover him all the time.
We got to talk about those things, So I guess I would just say, look, I think it's good that there is partisan competitiveness in America, and that forces all of us who are in politics to go out and talk to people, to listen to people, and to engage in civic life like you guys do in Franklin's Philadelphia.
I like all of that. I really do, and Jamie, that's all great on paper. And but there's a reason why our founders were very concerned about factions, parties. And there's one very, very important reason. People. People. The system relies on the people behaving in a way that uphold the words and the principles and the ideas. So you talk about the members who swore the oath, but then do what? Human behavior is the thing George Washington was the most concerned about when they were talking about, we're going to do this great thing and we're going to have all this representation. It's like, what? parties, I don't know if we want to go down that road because we cannot control what people ultimately do and how they act in this system. And that's where all of us becomes the checks. There's the checks and balance in our system for a reason. There's a check that Jamie has on him with the Senate, within the legislative structure, and they are a check on the Senate. There's a check that the executive branch has on itself. It's called the Congress, but we can debate how that's played out over the last 30 years, right? But that check is there. The Supreme Court is a check on that system. But who's the check on all of it? You are. And I would say we have fundamentally abdicated the responsibility we have to check the system. Going back to the point I was making before about if that thing is the thing that gets you going and it's abortion, and I didn't want to give an impression, I'm with him on the abortion issue. I know a whole lot of pro-life Republicans like myself who are beyond the pale angry with what the party has done with this issue. But I also see at the same time, not a whole lot of folks getting upset about what's happening to Black and brown voting rights. All right? Is that the thing that we rally around to remind the country of its democratic principles, ideals, and responsibilities to each of its citizens, some of whom come from families that have been enslaved from over 400 years? I don't see the outrage. I don't see the protests. I don't see people standing up and putting their voice in the conversation with the members of Congress. Or more importantly, the state legislators who are drawing those very same lines that are concentrating power, very much like we see redlining in communities. Like we see, all types of other things happening in our school systems. People get upset about CRT and they don't even know what the hell it is. So we have, as citizens, a responsibility to check each other and have a responsibility to check the system that we have been charged with, again, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, not in order to form, my little community over here, or we the government, or we the president, or we the Congress. So for me, this is why the urgency of this moment is so important in trying to help people really move and understand that when it is gone, on Inauguration Day in 2025, what do you do that Wednesday when the newly elected President of the United States decides to impose martial law because he wants to relitigate the 2020 election? Or starts rounding up people that he disagrees with. Oh, by the way, he just announced, and was reported in the Washington, it wasn't announced, it was reported by those around him in the Washington Post that that's very much the plan, to start hauling people in and using the system against them. You good with that? You okay with that? Because if you are, you're next. Don't think you're not. And so that's the urgency of the moment for me in this democratic crisis that we have. And so we can focus on abortion, and we can focus on the economy, and we can focus on all these other issues, but none of that matters when your behind is being hauled off to jail because you said something the President of the United States doesn't like. Who's going to stand up for the country then?
Before we move on to something else, I want to go back to what we were talking about with the parties, because I wanted to specifically ask you about your experience with the Tea Party and whether there are similarities.
There's no alcohol in this.
Right, yeah.
No, it's not fair.
Whether you see similarities to what we are seeing
No,
right
it's
now,
very different.
fault lines within the parties, or whether it is different?
It's very different, and I'm glad you raised the question, because Tea Party's gone. Tea Party's been gone since about 2012, right? This is not the Tea Party. What this is what came after it. Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street were two sides of the same coin during that period, 2009, 2010. And you want to see the updated manifestation of that was the 2016 election, where you had the Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump voter. That person exists. I met a lot of them during the 2016 campaign. That arc in time between that moment when the Tea Party emerged inside the GOP, and I will say this for the record, I think people who study history will appreciate this, that was part of a lineage that goes back to the 1950s and actually the 1930s, that has festered inside the Republican Party. You know this, sir, for a long, long time. It manifested itself in the late 50s with the John Birch Society. It manifested itself when Nixon decided the only way to win the White House was to create a Southern strategy to bring into the party very angry and frustrated white men in the South who were repulsed by the fact that Lyndon Johnson finally embraced, himself a segregationist, embraced civil rights after the death of Kennedy. It then manifested itself again when the party decided that it would embrace the moral majority, which was emerging in the South. Now we've got Christian nationalism injected into American politics, full-throatedly.
I'll tell you something about Christian nationalism. I mean, because this is all over the Republican Party in Congress today. And, you know, the speaker didn't just pop out of nowhere. I mean,
No.
he's reflecting the views of a lot of the members. I had one of my colleagues say just a few weeks ago, the Texas legislature voted to endorse the 10 Commandments. We should vote to endorse the 10 Commandments. And I said, you know, gee, the 10 Commandments have been around for millennia without an endorsement by the House of Representatives or the Free Caucus.
I think we're good.
So they pressed it, and so I went to the Rules Committee to my friend Jim McGovern, and I said, Jim, if we're going to vote on the 10 Commandments, we should have to vote on each commandment separately, okay? You shouldn't be able to get away with the omnibus package.
Right.
Because then you'll be taking the name of the Lord in vain. So you can't vote for any commandment you've ever violated. But, you know, it just doesn't end. And another colleague got up the other day and said, the moral downfall of America was in 1962 in Engel versus Vitale when the Supreme Court banned prayer in the public schools. And I had to get up and say, actually, the Supreme Court never banned prayer in the public schools. As long as there are pop math quizzes, there will be prayer in the public schools. Okay?
Right.
Anybody can pray whenever he or she wants to. It's just the government can't compel you to pray by a script that they write. But so we're fighting the battles that Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and Alexander Hamilton fought more than 2 centuries ago to establish an Enlightenment government. And they're, you know, the Republican Party, now that abortion has been taken away from them because of the good people of Kansas and Ohio and Michigan who've told them exactly where America is on that, they don't really have much to keep them together other than Donald Trump, who dictates orders to them, and then their view of religion, their falsified view of the Christian religion and their idea that America's a Christian country and they're going to impose religiosity on people through public institutions, which was the exact opposite of what the framers wanted. Right. The framers were rebelling against centuries of religious conflict and warfare and wars between the Catholics and the Protestants in Europe that were every bit as vicious as the wars between the Shia and the Sunni today, witchcraft trials, inquisitions, crusades. They just said, enough. They said, we're going to be the first nation on earth to establish the separation of church and state. No establishment of religion, free exercise of religion, and all the allied values, including the freedom of speech, which, you know, we were just fighting about this week. Is it this week? Today's? Yeah. 2 days ago, I got up to defend Rashida Tlaib, not the substance of what she said, but her right to be a member of Congress because she's been elected by her constituents and to go there without having the disciplinary process being used against her because people disagree with her. Now, if we do that with 435 members, when will it ever end? The Speaker of the House takes the position, as I was saying, that there should be no abortion in America. He also takes the position that gay people should not have a right to get married and that gay people should be able to be sentenced to jail for sodomy. He attacked the Lawrence versus Texas decision and said the sodomy laws were fine. Now, when we get the gavel back, and we will in 2025, should we censure him for his views because they're outside of the mainstream? And then they said, well, no, this is about history because they don't like Rashida Tlaib's views of history. Well, what about the more than 100 members who voted not to take down the statues of Confederate traitors to the Union who were expelled from Congress because, you know, they've got no particular problem with that, or they say that that's violating, you know, heritage and so on? Should we censure those people because of their political incorrectness? What a dangerous path to go down. We should never be using the disciplinary process of the US Congress to punish people for their speech. If you look at how it's been used in history, it's for people who had sex with pages, people who took bribes, people who joined the Confederacy, not because the majority disagreed with their views. So it's right up on the wall here. That's what the freedom of speech is about. It's easy to defend the freedom of speech when you love the speech. The test is whether you can defend the freedom of speech when you hate the speech. So.
You're describing a lot of divisions. I'm going to ask you a really easy question. It's not easy, I'm just kidding. What is the future of bipartisanship?
Well, look, I think that bipartisanship, you know, for people who are in budget committees, it comes through wheeling and dealing and log rolling. And that works because if there's money to give away, you know, somebody's constituents want this, somebody's constituents want that. In my field, I've never been on a budget committee. I don't have that kind of power. But in the committees I've been on, like the Judiciary Committee and the Oversight Committee, bipartisanship comes from principles, right? I got up to defend George Santos, not because I believe anything he says or because I believe he didn't commit crimes. He's been charged with credit card fraud and conspiracy, and he's been charged with embezzle, you know, all kinds of crazy stuff. But guess what? He hasn't been convicted yet. And the Congress has never expelled someone from the House of Representatives before they've been convicted, either in court or in the ethics process. So it was a bunch of Republicans who said, let's get rid of him. He's a political albatross. He's a liability for us now, when they'd been defending him a year before because they wanted his vote on the floor. And I said, not so fast, because you're setting a precedent for the future. We're actually going to be expelling people from the US Congress when they haven't been convicted of anything, and we haven't even had the ethics disciplinary process. So, you know, I mean, he sent me a thank you note, which I rejected, and I said, please think about resigning. Was
it handwritten?
And I said you should apologize to the people of New York for your lies and deceit, and I think you must have assumed you could get away with it because it's the party of Donald Trump, which is based on big lies, much bigger lies than George Santos has ever told. But the point is, we've got to think in terms of principle. If we don't think in terms of the Constitution and the rule of law, everything is lost. Everything is lost, our freedom and our democracy. We've got to stick to the law.
Do you think voters value bipartisanship?
Oh, that's a good question. Do voters value bipartisanship?
Because if voters...
I tell you who values it.
If voters don't value it, why do you do it?
You know who really values bipartisanship? Lobbyists do, because they always come to my office and they say, oh, we've got a bipartisan bill for you. And I'm very suspicious. They say, by bipartisan, what you mean is that you want to buy both parties, and you want to buy one and get the other for free. So I believe in multi-partisanship. I can't remember, George or someone before said omnipartisanship. I like that idea. There are millions of people who hate both of our parties. And that's fine. That forces us to go out and speak about the principles and the values we actually have and what we're trying to advance.
Now, I agree with that. So let me back up just a little bit because it ties in to what we're talking about now, where we said a little bit earlier, and you just referenced parties. I've always advocated for, which may be really popular inside the RNC, for a couple of things. One, the elimination of our primary system, because it's wholly manufactured by the parties, right? It's not constitutionally required. It's not even required by any state legislator or any congressional action. So we can do away with that process if we want. But the parties won't let that go because that's where they control the votes, they control the money, they control the process. But I think that's how we begin to get ourselves out of this space. Two, I welcome anybody who wants to form a party to form one. But the problem is, you can't do it here at the presidential level. Why? Because of the way we elect a president. We don't elect the president by majority vote. We elect the president through an electoral college process. So a president can have 8 million more votes than his or her opponent and lose in our process. But for governor, senator, state legislative races, county executives, that's where you germinate this idea of rebuilding the electoral process and the electoral system in this country. So you can experiment with Final Five voting, ranked choice voting, things that kind of engage citizens to be a part of the process a lot more. All of that feeds into this idea of bipartisanship, because in that process, guess what happens? I got to talk to everybody. I got to spend time talking to Democrats as a Republican and Republicans as a Democrat. You know why? Because I need your vote. I need you to support my ideas, and I need you to be a part of what I'm trying to do. And voters then have greater control and say when Jamie and Michael aren't working well together. They're going to go, why aren't you two working that out? In this building downstairs, and I mentioned this to the students Jamie and I met with before, there's a picture on the wall, a painting of Ronald Reagan after his assassination. He's in his hospital bed. And kneeling next to the bed in prayer with him is the then Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill. Could you imagine that today if something happened to President Biden, God forbid?
The prayer part I can imagine.
Yeah, right. But could you?
Well, you could see Mitch McConnell.
Really? Really?
But can I pick up on what you're saying?
Yeah.
Because, look, we are in a crisis mode, as Michael says, to defend every institution we've got against the authoritarianism that Donald Trump has unleashed in American politics. It's just true. We're trying to defend the courts and the rule of law. We're trying to defend the freedom of speech and the freedom of press. We're trying to defend the House of Representatives, which didn't have a speaker for 4 weeks, and now they're talking about shutting the government down on November 17th. And we're really trying to defend the basic institutions of society, which is why what this Committee of 70 does is so beautiful, because Pennsylvania is such a building block of democracy in America. But having said that, that implies that democracy is a fixed and static thing, which it never is. It never is. If you read Tocqueville's Democracy in America, Tocqueville said, democracy is either shrinking and shriveling away, or it's growing and it's expanding. That's the democracy I know in America. If you read the Constitution the way I read it, the majority of the amendments we've passed since the original Bill of Rights celebrated here have been democracy expanding, suffrage extending amendments. The 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. The 14th Amendment gives us equal protection. The 15th Amendment says no race discrimination in voting. The 17th Amendment shifts the mode of election of the US senators from the legislatures to the people. The 19th Amendment doubles the franchise in America by giving women the right to vote. The 23rd Amendment says people in Washington, D.C. can vote at least for president. The 24th Amendment abolishes poll taxes, and the 26th Amendment lowers the voting age to 18. The vast majority of our amendments are about the expansion of democracy. So are we going to keep it going? That's the only question. It's 2023. Do you think it's time that we start electing the President of the United States the way we elect governors and senators and mayors and everybody else? Whoever gets the most votes wins. How about that?
Yeah.
I mean, doesn't that make sense?
Well,
I mean, I just heard a report, we spend hundreds of millions of dollars exporting American ideas about elections and democracy to other countries. You know, one thing they never come back to us with is, oh, you know that electoral college thing you got? That sounds really interesting. Maybe we'll import that to our country. I mean, come on. It's 2.5 centuries old. It was adopted at a time when the country didn't have transportation and communication infrastructure that could even allow for an election on one day. But now all of these curly-Q little procedures and half measures and ratifications can get you killed. I was there on January 6th. Because you get a strategic bad faith actor like Donald Trump, they will try to exploit every weakness in the electoral college system in order to revisit the results. And that's one thing I could not get my fellow members of the January 6th committee to deal with. Liz Cheney is, my beloved friend who I adore, but she's from Wyoming, and she thinks, wrongly, but she thinks the electoral college helps small states. Nobody goes to campaign for president in Wyoming. Everybody knows it's a red state. Nobody goes to campaign in Delaware. They know it's a blue state. You might be a small red state or blue state. It doesn't make any difference. The whole election comes down to the swing states, in the large swing states like Pennsylvania. And what about a constitutional amendment on the right to vote? We still don't have that. We've got this ragtag sequence of amendments that try to open up the suffrage, but we don't have what the South African Constitution has today, which is simply a statement that everybody who lives in the country has the right to vote at every level of government. That's what we need. We got millions of disenfranchised people. How about statehood for Washington, D.C.? How about statehood for Puerto Rico? We've got to get the engines of democracy moving again.
So,
you talked about...
If I could, reclaiming my time, and
it's all yours.
The critical thing to everything you said, wrapping back into this idea of bipartisanship, do the American people believe in it? Do they want it?
Do they want it?
Do they want it?
Do they value it?
Do they value it? They may want it, but I don't think they really fully value it because they don't respond to the very things you're talking about. You're talking about this expansion of constitutional rights and principles, and no one is clamoring about the fact that voting rights are being stripped away. And no one is looking across the aisle to say, look, we live in a state in which the Democrats gerrymandered Republicans out of power, all right, in the state of Maryland. In South Carolina or in Alabama, Republicans gerrymander Democrats out of power. That's the state of our politics.
Well, not exactly, though, because...
Well, not exactly what?
With the For the People Act, which all the Democrats supported, abolishes gerrymandering and...
Okay, great. And whoopee, did it pass?
No, but that's because of the Republican Party. That's your party.
Wait a minute, Jamie, it's not just your Republican Party.
It's certainly not your Republican. I wish it were your Republican Party. We'd be in a different place.
Point.
Yeah.
Where were the citizens who actually gave a damn about the act? I mean, I hear Democrats in Congress proposing all these things, but I don't see, outside of very narrow issues, I don't see citizens clamoring for the bipartisanship or for these bills to get passed. We have largely, as citizens, checked out. How many town hall meetings did you hold in your district on this bill?
Oh, on the For the People Act? I mean, you've picked an issue where I don't shut up about it. I talk about democracy all the time.
But how many, that's my point. Yeah. You did it. You're one of 400 and some. My point is, there is no energy out there for the types of changes that would push bipartisanship to the forefront, which is why I referenced the picture. Look, a lot of this is political behavior. Political behavior defines how citizens respond. You don't believe me? You referenced January 6th. You lived it. The political behavior dictated an outcome that was realized on that day. Go back 30 years. In the middle of impeaching Bill Clinton, Republicans and Democrats balanced the nation's budget and reformed welfare in a bipartisan effort. My point is that that behavior is an example that goes out across the country and people see it. When our politicians behave badly, people behave badly. When our people behave badly, our politicians behave badly. That's the cycle we find ourselves in. So the question is, how do our politicians are afraid, at least in my party, and I would dare say in yours. You trust me, when your progressive wing rises up, and they will, when you get your next open election, trust me what's going to happen. Trust me, they're not going to sit idly by. They've watched, they've learned. It may not be your members, but it certainly is the activists on the street. My Tea Party, that's why I said my Tea Party and the Occupy Wall Street were two sides of the same coin. 2016, you have Donald Trump and you have Bernie Sanders, two sides of the same coin, both hating government, both hating corporate America, both going after institutions in the same way. And that behavior is being taught by the political leadership to the people out there, and they're reflecting it back. That's what I see as part of the problem. How do we get to bipartisanship? Change the way you behave. How do we get the bipartisanship? Change the way you behave if you really want it. That's all I'm saying.
But does what you're just describing, and when we were talking about the springing up of new parties, whether it's the No Labels Party, the Forward Party, the Working
No
Family
Labels Party? I've got a label for them.
The working,
Probably the same one I
I'll
got.
let them know. The Working Families Party.
Yeah.
It's fractures. It's fractures not just within the party, but it's fractures within the country.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's...
Well, I mean, it depends on fundamentally if you want to take a tragic view of human history and things fall apart and the center will not hold, or whether you want to take an optimistic and romantic view, which I guess I've got. I mean, I once heard Nelson Mandela say that, he said that optimism is like a personality disposition. We're born with it or we're not. He said, but hope is a choice. Hope's a choice to act with hope or to act with cynicism. And I think we're dealing with that every day. I agree with that, but this is the role of leadership. This is why I wish I weren't looking across at the aisle at Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and Matt Gaetz. I wish I were looking at Michael Steele. I wish Michael Steele were running for president in the Republican Party. I mean, where is the Lincoln Republican? Where's the Lincoln Republican that America is looking for? I mean, right now, if we're going to find one, I will be the Lincoln Republican that America's looking for as a Democrat. Right. Because I believe in Lincoln. And, Lincoln wrote some beautiful stuff about insurrection that, I tried to invoke during our hearings about January 6th. He said, insurrection is an assault on the original principle of democracy, which is the right of the people to choose their own leaders. And so these maniacs are coming into the Congress saying it's our house and kicking out the elected representatives in the House and the Senate, saying this is our house. I'm like, no, even if you're 30,000 people, it's not your house. The House belongs to the elected representatives of the American people. And that's why it's a scandal that Donald Trump is running around the country saying he's going to grant a mass pardon to the people who put 150 of our police officers into the hospital with broken ribs and broken noses and black eyes. And I mean, we've had police officers who've had to retire because they can't serve anymore. And now it's an article of faith within the Republican Party, if you listen to their debates, that they're going to pardon these people who they call political prisoners. Perjury trader Queen calls them hostages. And Lauren Gropert, some people call her that, not me, but
But all of that, but here's the thing. Yeah. All of that is getting fed. Those people exist the way they exist because they're sort of getting fed that. And I don't know how do you stop the feeding of that? Look, I mean, I go back to what I said earlier. I appreciate all of it. But if the election were held today, Joe Biden would lose to Donald Trump. That's where we are. Okay? That's where we are. Pennsylvania probably would go in the red column today. Wisconsin would probably go in the red column today. Arizona certainly would. So, I mean, that's where we are. And so for me, I'm just trying to figure out, how do I make that not a reality?
Well, I mean,
yeah. So that's why, I mean, hope is good, and I'm all about hope. But the reality, I have to also deal with the reality in front of me, and I got to have a strategy to deal with that reality, and I've got to have a mechanism, which is the work that you do here, right? Educate, inform, and enlighten, and hopefully move people. That's what we're in the movement business. We need to be as citizens. How many of you dread going to Thanksgiving dinner? How many of you dread family celebrations? How many of you dread hanging out with certain friends? Right? That's America. That's what we've become. Where you don't want to go spend time with a relative because you don't want to hear them talk about politics. So we need to begin to change that. That's not a constitutional issue. That's a human issue. That's how we look at, we do not regard, Jamie, we don't regard let me put it this way. On January 6th, the American people gathered on the mall of the Congress, calling to hang the Vice President of the United States. That's where we are. That's not a constitutional problem.
No,
that's a human nature problem. It is something about us that we would gather in that space on those grounds, commit violence, and call for the killing of the Vice President of the United States.
Well, wait, can I say something about that? Because it was a constitutional problem, obviously, on that day when Trump and his lieutenants tried to get Vice President Pence to step outside.
That's what was going on inside the building.
No, I got
I'm talking about what was going on in the streets.
Okay, and I want to say something about what was going on in the streets. There's a woman who's 78 years old who came to Washington called by Donald Trump, grandmother. And, you know, there were 3 levels of insurrection and coup activity. There was the inner level where Trump really thought he was going to be able to seize the presidency and stay in office. Then right outside of that was the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the Ku Klux Klan, the organized domestic violent extremist groups who led the attack on the officers to storm the building. And then there were the extras who were called in by Donald Trump, all the mega lists, everybody on the internet and the social media, and those people were the outer tier, but they watched what happened with people beating the hell out of police officers, and a lot of them said, we're gonna get in on that too, and they helped to storm the Capitol as well. But this one woman is very interesting. She was 78, and she believed in Donald Trump, because remember, in 2016, Donald Trump basically ran to Hillary Clinton's left. He said, you know, Hillary is taking all the money from the investment banks, and you know, Hillary is the captive of special interests, and he said, I'm not going to get you into all these foreign wars, and so on and so forth. We don't have a lot of coherence, ideological coherence in American politics. So anyway, she fell for Donald Trump. And then he said, come to Washington. She came to Washington, and she went into the building, and she did some stuff. I can't remember specifically what she did, but she ended up with like 60 days in jail in DC. And it was all over like the right-wing blogosphere, the ecosystem. And Trump said, can you believe this? Hunter Biden is free today, but this 78-year-old granny is in jail. And you know what she wrote back? It wasn't tweet at that point, it was whatever, the Truth Social. She said, I was in jail because I deserved it, because I listened to you, Donald Trump, and I will never make that mistake again of falling for your propaganda. Now that's not where Rudy Giuliani is today. It's not, but there are a lot of people, and we had some of them testify before the January 6th committee who regret what they did. So I'm not giving up on those people.
Oh, I'm not giving up on them. I'm just saying there's a whole lot more of them out there.
Well, no, right. But I also want to keep this in mind. Hillary Clinton got 2.5 million more votes than Joe Biden. He beat her than Donald Trump. Trump beat her in the Electoral College. Joe Biden got 7.5 million more votes than Donald Trump and barely beat him, as you point out correctly, Michael, in the Electoral College. But millions and millions more people believe in democracy and freedom and the right to choose and climate change and science than are on the other side. And what we're up against is a bag of tricks that Trump's GOP has with the gerrymandering of our districts, with right-wing judicial activism in the packed courts, with the filibuster. All of these are anti-democratic mechanisms. Some of them are constitutional, like the Electoral College. Some of them are not, like the filibuster. We need to make America more democratic so the will of the majority can be expressed in our politics.
So,
Before we run out of time, I wanted to ask specifically about, and you mentioned the institutions in this country and defending institutions. Years after January 6th, how dependent are we still on this person or that person doing the right thing?
Well, it's dependent on everybody doing the right thing as much as possible. The great thing about our constitutional system is designed is we have these checks and balances, although that phrase isn't used in the Constitution or even in the Federalist Papers. And some of that is used to diminish the central role of Congress. But I can come back and talk about that sometime. But in any event, we do have a division of powers, right? With the lawmaking branch, the execution branch. You know, the president's main job is to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. The exact opposite, of course, of what Trump was doing. And then we have the judicial branch. We also have the system of federalism. So we have states and we have localities and we have the federal government. So when one door is blocked to you, and the civil rights movement figured this out, and the suffrage movement figured it out, and the LGBTQ movement figured it out, and the human rights movement, and the peace movement, all of the great civilizing movements of our history figured this out. When one door is blocked at one level of government, you can go somewhere else. There's always somewhere else you can go. So that's a great feature of where we are, that something might be closed to you, but there's somewhere else you can go in order to try to make change. But ultimately, it is the people's constitution. It is we the people, and it is the people's government. And so I also go back to the fundamental importance of education, educating people about the process, educating people about our rights, educating people about their system, and then people stepping out of their comfort zone to take a leadership position that moves other people, that gives people hope. My dad used to say to us when we were growing up, when everything looks hopeless, you're the hope. I grew up with that kind of guilt, okay? But you are the hope. I mean, think how many people you have more resources than psychologically, emotionally, financially, politically. There are a lot of people who need help more than you do. There's a lot of people on earth today, in Israel, in Gaza, who need our help, right? So the question is, how big are our hearts? How big are our minds? Can we rise to the occasion?
I think we are out of time. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, my
That was
friend.
awesome.
Can I take a point of personal privilege as a Marylander to say something about my fellow Marylander? You saw Jamie and I kind of sparring up here and having a little fun and important discussion. But I just want to tell you personally, I am so proud of you and so grateful you were in the well of the Congress, that you served the country's interest and not your own. And we need more Jamie Raskins. We need more Jamie Raskin. Thank you, my friend.
I love Michael Steele. How about Michael Steele for the Republican nominee?
No, you don't want that. You don't want that.